The distant hum of the alien fleet grew louder as it neared the planet's orbit. To the human forces stationed on the edge of the galaxy, it was the sound of impending annihilation. A coalition of terrifying alien species, the Xreth foremost among them, had converged on the human colony. Their forces were vast, their technology far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. For most soldiers, the thought of facing such an enemy would have been paralyzing. But for Private Jake Turner, it was just another challenge to overcome. Inside the command center, frantic officers rushed to prepare the defenses, their faces twisted in anxiety as they pored over battle maps, coordinating the last-minute evacuation of civilians. Outside, the sky flickered with the sudden bursts of fire as human ships took off in desperate attempts to hold the line. The Xreth had no such worries. Their ships, sleek and black as the void, glided silently through space, effortlessly tearing through the human fleet like paper. But despite the overwhelming odds, Jake remained unbothered. "Private Turner, are you listening?" shouted Captain Harris, the commanding officer, his voice tense as he rushed into the barracks. He was met with the sight of Turner, sitting calmly on his cot, boots off, eyes closed as if in deep meditation. "This isn't some drill. The Xreth are *here*. Turner didn't stir. His calmness was unnerving, as though the threat of a full-scale invasion was as trivial as an afternoon breeze. Harris gritted his teeth. "Turner, we need every man to prepare for battle. You need to be ready to fight." Jake slowly opened one eye, glancing up at the captain. He gave a slow, almost lazy smile. "And I will be, sir. But I need my rest." With that, he lay back down, pulling a blanket over himself, his hands folded behind his head as if he were simply preparing for a long night's sleep. Captain Harris stared, a mixture of disbelief and frustration clouding his features. He was about to say something when the emergency sirens began to wail, a harsh, piercing sound that cut through the air like a knife. The battle had officially begun. Harris turned and rushed out the door, but before he could leave, he paused, looking back at Turner. "You're sure about this, Turner?" Jake didn't respond. He hadn't moved at all, his breathing slow and steady, as though he was in the middle of a deep slumber. For a long moment, Harris stood frozen in the doorway, trying to make sense of the situation. The sound of explosions reverberated through the walls as the Xreth struck, and yet Turner remained still, untouched by the chaos surrounding them. "Good luck, Private," Harris muttered under his breath as he stepped into the hallway, uncertain whether Turner was a fool or something else entirely. The sky above the human base was no longer clear. The Xreth ships, black as void and thrumming with an eerie, unsettling hum, filled the heavens, blocking out the sun. For hours, their relentless bombardment had pounded the surface below, reducing defensive structures to rubble. The ground shook with every impact, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of burning metal and scorched earth. Human forces scrambled to hold the line, but the odds were not in their favor. Panic spread like wildfire among the ranks. Inside the command center, Captain Harris was hunched over a communication console, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly as he coordinated the evacuation of non-combat personnel. The Xreth had made their presence known in full force. Their psychic warfare was more powerful than anything the humans had ever encountered, beams of mental energy that could shred the mind, leaving soldiers lost in madness. Even the toughest among them had been reduced to gibbering wrecks. "Captain, the southern flank is falling," shouted Sergeant Daniels, his voice raw with fear. "We've lost contact with Alpha Team. I don't know if anyone survived." Harris slammed a fist onto the table, frustration and helplessness warring in his chest. "We can't hold out much longer. We need reinforcements." The door to the command center opened, and once again, Harris's eyes fell on the sight of Private Jake Turner, still in the same posture, still lying on his cot, his breathing steady and undisturbed. The soldier had not moved an inch, even as explosions rocked the building around them. There was no sign of panic, No indication that he had heard the desperate cries from the rest of the base. He was, to all appearances, completely at peace. Harris's jaw clenched. He marched over to Turner's cot, his boots echoing on the metal floor. "Turner, this is no time for a nap. The base is falling apart, and you're just lying there. The X-Reth are psychic, for God's sake. You can't just sleep through this." Turner finally opened his eyes, his gaze calm and steady, almost serene. "I know what I'm doing, sir." Harris's patience snapped. "What the hell does that mean?" Jake sat up slowly, stretching his arms as though waking from a casual rest. "It means I'm fine. The X-Reth might be able to break the minds of most of our people, but they can't touch me. Not like this." Harris stared in stunned disbelief, his mind struggling to wrap around the impossible words. "What do you mean? No one is immune to their attacks?" Turner smiled faintly, as though the answer was the simplest thing in the world. "I'm not like everyone else, Captain. I'm immune." Before Harris could respond, the sirens wailed again, louder this time, signaling an incoming wave of X-Reth forces. The air seemed to grow even heavier, the pressure mounting as the psychic power of the alien fleet began to press down on the human minds like a vice. The humans around them began to falter, many stumbling, clutching their heads in pain as the psychic assault took hold. Harris felt his own vision blur, his thoughts clouded with confusion and terror. But then, through the haze, he looked over at Turner. Jake remained unaffected, his face peaceful, his eyes focused on something far beyond the chaos. Without missing a beat, Turner stood up and grabbed his rifle. "You can't fight a war when your mind is shattered, sir. But if you stay calm, you can still fight back." Harris, still reeling, could only watch as Turner stepped past him, unaffected by the mental onslaught that was breaking every other soldier around them. His steps were sure, his demeanor unwavering. For the first time in the midst of the chaos, Harris felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was something to this man's calm that might turn the tide of the war. "Follow me, sir," Turner said. "We've got a battle to win." And with that, he led the charge toward the front lines, while the rest of the soldiers struggled to keep their minds intact. The front lines were chaos. The X-Reth had begun deploying their elite psychic warriors. Tall, gaunt figures with glowing blue eyes and skeletal limbs, their minds honed for battle. These were not mere soldiers. They were walking weapons, capable of slicing through the human psyche with a mere thought. As their mental waves swept across the battlefield, humans crumpled in agony, their minds shattered into pieces. Screams filled the air as soldiers fell, their bodies twitching, their faces twisted in terror. The invaders' mental assault was overwhelming. Yet, through it all, there was one soldier who stood untouched. Private Jake Turner. Turner walked among the fallen, his expression serene, his posture calm as if he were strolling through a park, not walking through a war zone. Around him, the minds of his comrades were being twisted and broken by the alien force. The psychic energy crackled in the air, a palpable force that sent ripples of agony through the human ranks. But Turner, he moved forward with unshaken confidence, unaffected by the psychic waves that obliterated everyone in their path. Captain Harris, standing just behind Turner, watched in stunned silence. He had seen the destruction firsthand, the way the X-Reth shattered human minds without a second thought. But now, with Turner at the helm, something else was happening. The soldiers who had been on the brink of madness were beginning to recover, their eyes sharpening as the fog of fear lifted. Turner's steady presence was like an anchor, pulling them back from the brink of collapse. "Keep it together, soldiers," Turner shouted, his voice cutting through the confusion. "They want you to break. Don't let them." Harris, still struggling against the pressure that gnawed at the edges of his thoughts, forced his legs to move, following Turner's lead. It was like the human mind had a threshold, a breaking point. And Turner was an anomaly, immune to everything the X-Reth threw at him. "Turner, how the hell are you doing this?" Harris managed to ask through gritted teeth, his voice shaking from the psychic strain. No one else is holding up under this. How? Turner glanced back, his eyes serene as ever. You're trying to fight them with your head, Captain. You can't. You need to fight them with your mind, not your thoughts. What does that mean? Harris said, baffled, clutching his head as a fresh wave of psychic power pulsed through the air. It means, Turner continued, that you need to let go. Don't resist their power. Accept it. He paused, scanning the battlefield as soldiers around them rallied. You can't outthink a telepath, but you can outwill them. Focus. Find your calm. Harris swallowed, trying to push through the agony, trying to clear his mind. Turner's words echoed in his ears, a lifeline in a sea of mental chaos. Around them, the X-Wrath closed in, their eyes gleaming with the promise of victory. But now, something had shifted. The human soldiers were fighting back, not with weapons, but with their minds, their resolve hardened by Turner's unshakable calm. It wasn't just physical strength they were drawing on anymore. It was something deeper, something intangible. The will to endure. The first X-Wrath warrior who attempted to seize control of a soldier's mind was met with resistance, a brief flicker of doubt in the alien's normally impenetrable gaze. The warrior staggered, and in that moment it was clear the X-Wrath had underestimated humanity. They had no idea how resilient humans could be when pushed to their limit. Turner, still at the forefront, led the charge as a new wave of humanity's strength surged forward. The aliens were not prepared for this. They had come to conquer, to break, but instead, they were facing something far more dangerous, a species that could endure anything. Let's show them what we're made of, Turner said, his voice calm as ever. And with that, he and the soldiers charged forward, a relentless force of will against the alien psychic tide. The battle raged on, but the atmosphere was different now. There was a palpable shift in the air, a sense of growing defiance among the human soldiers. Where once their morale had crumbled under the weight of the X-Wrath's psychic onslaught, now they fought with a renewed fire. Turner's example was contagious, spreading like wildfire through the ranks. His calm resolve was a beacon in the chaos, and it sparked a realization. The X-Wrath could break their bodies, their minds, but they could not break their spirit. Captain Harris, still fighting against the psychic pressure, watched as more soldiers stood their ground, eyes clearing as the mental fog lifted. Some had been on the brink of madness just hours earlier, clutching their heads and screaming. Now they moved with purpose, their movements sharp and focused. It was as though the human will had formed a barrier that even the X-Wrath couldn't breach. Is it really happening? Harris muttered under his breath, staring at the scene before him. Turner had sparked something. But was it enough to turn the tide? The X-Wrath didn't seem to know what to make of it. The psychic warriors that had once moved through the battlefield like shadows, tearing through human minds with ease, now hesitated. Their eyes darted nervously as they sensed the change in the humans. They were used to domination. They were used to an enemy that bent to their will. But these humans, this human, were showing no signs of breaking. A ripple of concern spread through their ranks, and for the first time, the X-Wrath faltered. "Captain, we have to press the advantage," Turner said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. He was walking among the soldiers, guiding them with every step. He spoke with the same steady confidence, as if the war was already over. "The longer we stay here, the more they'll regroup. We need to push them back." Harris shook his head, trying to focus through the mental haze. "But they're everywhere. We can't fight them all at once." Turner smiled faintly, his gaze scanning the battlefield with laser precision. "Then we don't. We pick our targets. Focus. Hit their weak points. And remember, Captain, this isn't just a battle of weapons. It's a battle of wills." With that, Turner began to move forward, leading a small group of soldiers. They spread out, cutting through the enemy ranks with a precision that shocked even Harris. The X-Wrath warriors, who had been an overwhelming force just hours ago, were now struggling. Turner's calm presence seemed to strip away the X-Reth's confidence, their psychic grip loosening as human soldiers fought back with an intensity they hadn't shown before. One by one, the alien forces faltered. Where once they had been able to pick off human soldiers with ease, now they found themselves pushed back. The X-Reth were beginning to realize that this battle would not be won by brute strength alone. As Turner and his group advanced, they reached the X-Reth Command Center, an imposing structure perched high on a cliff. The heart of their invasion, the command center's fall would strike a critical blow to the invaders' morale. Turner knew what had to be done. He turned to Harris, his voice quiet but firm. "Captain, this is it. We take out their leaders, and we disrupt their entire chain of command." Harris, still reeling from the psychic pressure, but now feeling something stronger, determination, nodded. He looked out at the battlefield, now shifting in favor of humanity, and a spark of hope ignited in his chest. "Let's finish this." With that, they pressed forward, and for the first time since the X-Reth's arrival, the humans began to believe they might just win this fight. The X-Reth Command Center loomed ahead, a dark, jagged structure that seemed almost alive, its angular spires reaching toward the sky like twisted fingers. It pulsed with energy, the faint glow of alien technology shimmering through the cracks in its exterior. Turner, Harris, and their small squad of soldiers approached cautiously, the weight of their mission heavy in the air. This was the moment. The heart of the enemy lay just beyond that fortress. The battlefield behind them had become a scene of controlled chaos. The X-Reth, who had once seemed unstoppable, were now scattered and disoriented. Human forces, emboldened by Turner's calm, had found their footing, coordinating attacks with deadly efficiency. The psychic pressure that had crushed their will was now a distant memory for many of them. Yet they all knew that until the X-Reth command was destroyed, the fight would never truly be over. "Hold position," Turner commanded, his voice a quiet anchor amidst the noise of distant explosions and gunfire. He turned to Harris, his expression unreadable. "We get in, take out their leadership, and disrupt their telepathic network. This battle won't end until we break their chain of command." Harris, eyes narrowing, surveyed the alien structure. "How do you know it'll work?" Turner's gaze flicked to the sky, where X-Reth ships still hovered like vultures, circling overhead. The X-Reth rely on their network. They communicate and coordinate their attacks using their psychic connection. If we sever that link, they'll be disorganized. We'll have a chance to push them back for good. Harris nodded, his fingers tightening around his rifle. He wasn't entirely sure what Turner's plan would do, but the man had proven himself so far. If Turner believed they could win, Harris was ready to follow. As they moved toward the command center, the landscape seemed to shift. The ground felt strange beneath their boots, slick, unnaturally smooth. The X-Reth had shaped the very terrain to suit their needs, and the closer they got to their target, the more oppressive the air became. The psychic waves grew stronger, an almost physical pressure pushing against their minds. Harris felt his temples throb with the intensity of it, but Turner walked forward as if nothing had changed. "You're still good?" Harris asked, his voice strained. Turner glanced back, his eyes steady. "I'm fine. Stay focused." They approached the massive doors to the command center. It stood tall, its surface covered in strange symbols that seemed to shimmer and pulse, reacting to their presence. The alien architecture seemed to hum with life. Turner pressed his hand to the door, and a soft, resonant tone filled the air, signaling the activation of the entry mechanism. As the door slowly began to open, the oppressive psychic energy intensified, a wave that rippled through the air like an invisible storm. Harris felt a sharp pang in his head as the X-Reth's psychic presence tried to probe his thoughts, to force him into submission. It was more than physical pain. It was a mental assault, a twisted attempt to break his will. But Turner, once again, remained unshaken. He stepped forward, and the pressure around them seemed to dissipate as if Turner's very presence pushed it back. "Stay close," Turner whispered, and with that, they entered the command center. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of alien machinery, and the walls were lined with vast, glowing panels. At the far end of the room, seated at a throne-like structure, were 3 Xreth leaders, their eyes glowing with malicious power. They were the architects of the invasion, the ones who had bent the will of their forces to crush humanity. They turned slowly as Turner's squad entered, their sharp, predatory gazes locking onto the humans. One of them, its voice deep and resonant, spoke, sending a ripple of coldness through the room. "You think you can defeat us? You, who are nothing more than insects before our power." The alien's words cut through the air, like a blade through flesh. "Your species was always weak, fragile." Turner smiled faintly, the calm in his expression unwavering. "You should never underestimate humanity. We may not be the strongest, but we know how to fight when everything's on the line." And with that, the final phase of the battle began. The command center was a cacophony of alien energy, the air vibrating with a strange, otherworldly hum. The Xreth leaders sat before them, their glowing blue eyes piercing the humans with an almost predatory hunger. The aliens' presence was overwhelming, a psychic weight that seemed to crush the very air from their lungs. Yet through it all, Turner remained calm, his every movement deliberate, unaffected by the mental pressure that was suffocating the others. The Xreth leader who had spoken earlier rose from its throne-like seat, its elongated limbs gliding over the smooth alien surface. It was taller than the others, its appearance more refined, its presence more oppressive. This one exuded power, a suffocating, all-encompassing force that reached into the very core of the human soldiers. Harris could feel it, a pressure on his chest, like the weight of 100,000 tons. His vision blurred momentarily, and he staggered slightly, but he didn't dare take his eyes off the Xreth leader. "Foolish humans," the Xreth leader hissed, its voice like the crackling of static electricity. "You think you can disrupt our will? We have destroyed civilizations far more advanced than yours. You are but a brief spark, a fleeting ember in the void." Turner's expression didn't change. "You underestimate us," he said simply, his voice a calm ripple against the alien's tidal wave of psychic energy. "You think you've won because we don't have the same power, but that's where you're wrong." The alien's eyes flickered with annoyance, a subtle shift that betrayed its confidence wavering. It waved a hand, and the room shimmered with mental energy, the air distorting as a psychic field surrounded them. Harris could feel his thoughts start to scatter, his focus slipping as the Xreth weaponized their psychic might. A sense of hopelessness crept in, pulling at his mind like a shadow, but before it could take hold, Turner raised a hand. "Stop," Turner ordered. His voice was low but powerful, cutting through the noise of the psychic barrage like a knife. He stepped forward, and the field around them flickered and wavered. It was as though Turner's presence was destabilizing the alien's power, pushing back the influence that had been suffocating them all. The Xreth leader's eyes narrowed, its telepathic grip tightening. "You think you can resist us? No one resists the Xreth." Turner's lips twitched into a faint smile. "You've been living in the shadows too long. You don't understand what it means to be human." The alien's eyes narrowed in confusion, its grip tightening once again. But this time, Turner didn't falter. Harris watched, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and disbelief. The psychic pressure that had been choking him, forcing him into submission, began to lift. The other soldiers in the room stood straighter, their expressions shifting from panic to something else. Determination. The Xreth's influence was slipping. "You've underestimated us all," Turner said quietly. "You might have the power to break minds, but you can't break will. That's where you failed." The Xreth leader hissed in frustration, its form shifting as if preparing to strike. But Turner stepped forward without hesitation, his posture unwavering. He raised his hands, the air around him crackling with energy, not alien power, but human defiance. For the first time, The Xreth leader's confident facade faltered. It had never encountered an enemy like this, one that didn't yield to its psychic power. Before the alien could react, Turner extended his hand. The psychic field in the room pulsed, then shattered like glass. The power of the Xreth leaders will breaking apart under the sheer force of humanity's resolve. The alien staggered back, its psychic grip faltering for the first time. With the leader weakened, the rest of the Xreth forces outside the command center began to fall into disarray. The psychic connection between their warriors splintered, and the organized onslaught they had once launched became a disjointed mess. The invasion was faltering. "Captain," Turner said, his voice steady, "we've got them. It's time to finish this." With the psychic battlefield shifting in their favor, humanity now had the chance to take back control. But the true battle was just beginning. One final push to wipe out the Xreth leadership and send their forces into retreat. The room was alive with the tension of the moment, a palpable silence hanging in the air after the psychic clash. The Xreth leader, once an imposing figure of unchallenged power, now seemed fragile, staggering under the weight of Turner's will. The alien's glowing blue eyes flickered, and for the first time, doubt crept into its expression, something no human had ever seen before. The Xreth had always been certain of their superiority, but here, in the heart of their command center, humanity was proving that the mind could be more powerful than the psychic chains that bound them. Turner's eyes locked onto the leader, his expression calm but resolute. "You fail to see what makes us strong," he said, his voice steady, but carrying an undeniable force. "Your power is based on control, on breaking us. But you can't break what won't bend." The alien's mouth twisted in frustration, and its hands raised, fingers crackling with psychic energy, attempting to reassert its dominance. But as it did, it became clear that something fundamental had shifted. The leader's telepathic grasp faltered, as if its own power was no longer enough to dominate the humans in the room. Behind Turner, Harris and the others were already preparing for the final push. They had felt it too. The psychic pressure that had once seemed suffocating now felt weak, impotent, as if the invisible force that had held them in thrall was unraveling. Turner had broken the Xreth leader's hold, and the effect rippled outward. The soldiers, who had once been scattered and panicked, were now regaining control. Their minds were clearer, stronger, able to resist the psychic onslaught that had torn them apart. They took up positions, weapons raised, their resolve hardened by the knowledge that they were no longer fighting for survival alone. They were fighting together. The Xreth leader's expression twisted in anger as it finally pushed forward, launching a psychic strike aimed directly at Turner. The air hummed with the crackling intensity of raw alien energy, but Turner didn't flinch. He stepped forward, and with a powerful mental shove, met the alien's assault head-on. For a moment, there was nothing but the raw clash of wills, a mental battlefield unlike any human had ever witnessed. Harris watched, transfixed, as Turner stood his ground against the alien leader's relentless assault. It was a test of endurance, a battle not just of strength, but of heart. The Xreth leader's attack grew more frantic, more desperate as its psychic reserves began to drain, unable to break the human who refused to yield. And then, with a final, decisive push, Turner shattered the alien's psychic assault. The leader reeled back, its form flickering like a broken hologram, the energy that once flowed through it now gone. For a moment, the room seemed to stand still, the weight of the battle settling into a heavy silence. "Captain," Turner said, his voice cool and composed, "we've broken them." The Xreth leader crumbled, its glowing eyes dimming as its psychic power drained away entirely. It had been the heart of the invasion, the source of the aliens' control over their forces. Now, with its defeat, the entire command structure was collapsing. Outside the command center, the Xreth warriors hesitated. The psychic connection between them and their leader had been severed, and they were left scrambling, disoriented. The tide had turned. The human soldiers, emboldened by Turner's victory, surged forward, their weapons now more than enough to overpower the alien forces in disarray. The Xreth invasion was falling apart. Harris looked at Turner, his mind racing with a mix of disbelief and awe. "We did it. You actually did it." Turner didn't smile. His gaze remained fixed on the fallen leader, his mind already turning to the next move. "Not yet. We need to make sure this doesn't happen again." But the truth was clear. The Xreth had lost. Their leadership had been shattered, their psychic network broken, and their soldiers were in full retreat. Humanity had faced the impossible, and against all odds, they had prevailed. The Xreth leader crumpled to the ground, its body now little more than a flickering shadow, its once mighty psychic presence extinguished. The command center had fallen silent, the hum of alien energy fading to a distant, eerie stillness. For a moment, it felt like the entire universe was holding its breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Then the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from behind them, sharp and measured. Harris turned, his heart still racing, to find a squad of soldiers emerging from the shadows of the command center. Their faces were grim, but there was an unmistakable spark in their eyes, a mix of relief, disbelief, and a fierce determination that spoke louder than words. "Is it over?" Harris asked, his voice hoarse. "Not yet," Turner replied, his gaze never leaving the fallen alien leader. "But it will be soon." As the seconds stretched into minutes, the tremors of the battle that had raged outside began to reach the command center. Overhead, the sky seemed to grow darker as Xreth ships began to retreat, their once ominous formations now scattering like broken glass. Without the leader to guide them, the alien forces were lost. No longer the coordinated, deadly army that had arrived just days ago, but a collection of confused and disoriented warriors, unable to function without their psychic connection. "Captain, the Xreth are pulling back," one of the soldiers said, her voice urgent as she scanned the control panels. "They're in full retreat. They've lost command." Harris's eyes widened in disbelief. It had happened so quickly. Just hours ago, they were on the brink of annihilation. And now it seemed like the invaders were already crumbling. The tide had truly turned. Turner nodded, his expression unreadable. "Let them retreat. We need to finish what we started." With a grim determination, Turner gave the order to press forward. The human forces surged out of the command center, their weapons raised, moving with purpose. The Xreth soldiers who had once seemed so overwhelming were now scattered and vulnerable, and the humans didn't hesitate. Each alien that stood against them was quickly overcome, their psychic resistance nothing compared to the raw, unyielding will of the soldiers who now fought with everything they had. But even as the alien forces fell apart, Turner knew that the victory would not be truly complete until the last of their ships were disabled. The Xreth had come from the stars, and if they were allowed to regroup, they would only return stronger. He turned to Harris as they approached the last Xreth vessel still hovering above the battlefield. "Take it down," Turner said, his voice steady as ever. Harris hesitated only a moment, then nodded. With a final burst of firepower, the Xreth ship exploded into a fiery ball of light, its wreckage falling to the ground in pieces. It was the last of their fleet, and with its destruction, the invasion was effectively over. The humans stood victorious, the dust of battle settling around them. The alien threat that had once seemed insurmountable was now no more. The soldiers, their faces marked with exhaustion and blood, looked around, taking in the scope of what they had just accomplished. Harris turned to Turner, his voice filled with awe. "We did it. You did it." Turner finally allowed himself a small smile, though his eyes remained hard. "We did it. Together." As the last Xreth forces retreated into the void, the soldiers stood united, knowing they had achieved what no one had thought possible. Humanity had faced the unimaginable and emerged victorious, not through superior firepower or technology, but through the strength of their will. They had fought not just for survival, but for the future. And as the sun began to rise over the battlefield, the human race knew one thing for certain: they would never be the same again.